The plasma bolt that vaporized New Geneva wasn't meant to be an opening move. It was meant to be the only move. Captain HFY of the Dominion watched the blue-white lance of energy streak across the void, its brilliance briefly outshining Europa's pale surface. 3 million human souls had just been reduced to constituent atoms in the span of a heartbeat. The orbital habitat that had served as humanity's crown jewel of engineering now existed only as expanding debris and radiation. "Target eliminated," reported his weapons officer, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. No survivors detected. The bridge of the dreadnought Sovereign Talon thrummed with the satisfied energy of a hunt concluded. Around them, the rest of the hegemony fleet, 1,200 vessels strong, maintained formation in the outer Sol system. This was supposed to be a demonstration, a surgical strike to show these upstart primates their place in the galactic order. HFY's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, watching the debris field expand. Humanity had grown too bold, too quickly. In a mere 3 centuries since achieving faster-than-light travel, they had established colonies across 17 systems, formed trade agreements with 6 minor species, and worst of all, they had begun asking questions about hegemony authority. The galactic hegemony had ruled for 12,000 years. They had seen 1,000 species rise from their homeworlds, each one eventually learning the same lesson: bow or burn. Humanity would learn it too. "Begin broadcasting the surrender terms," HFY commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 10 millennia of conquest. "Standard hegemony protocol. Complete disarmament, dissolution of their military, tribute of 40% gross planetary production, and contact!" The sensor officer's voice cracked with alarm. "Multiple ships emerging from hyperspace, bearing everywhere. The tactical display exploded with red markers as humanity's response arrived. Not the scattered defense fleets they had expected, but something else entirely. Ships materialized from hyperspace at impossible distances, some beyond Neptune's orbit, others weaving between Jupiter's moons. The formation patterns were unlike anything in hegemony tactical doctrine. "How many?" HFY demanded, his confidence wavering as the count climbed. 8,000, 12,000, sir. They're still coming through." But it wasn't just the numbers that sent ice through HFY's circulatory system. It was the ships themselves, where hegemony vessels were sleek predators built for intimidation. And overwhelming force, these human ships looked wrong. Utilitarian. Some appeared to be converted mining vessels, their hulls bristling with improvised weapon mounts. Others were clearly civilian transports, their cargo bays torn open to reveal missile batteries. "Admiral?" came a transmission from the lead human vessel, its voice carrying a strange, cold calm. "This is Fleet Commander Rylan Skavik of the Terran Defense Corps. You have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why humanity doesn't need a crown jewel." HFY's mandibles spread in what might have been laughter on a dozen other worlds. "You dare threaten the hegemony with civilian vessels and mining ships. Your orbital city burns, human. Look upon its ashes and despair." "Admiral," Skavik's voice carried no emotion, no rage, no fear, only a terrible industrial certainty. "You killed 3 million of our people. You wanted to show us our place in your galactic order." The human fleet began to move, not in the elegant formations of military tradition, but with the purposeful precision of construction equipment. Ships that had built habitats in deep space, hauled asteroids across solar systems, and carved cities from airless moons now turned their tools toward a different kind of construction. "Allow us to show you ours." The first salvo wasn't weapons fire. It was the entire output of humanity's industrial capacity, compressed into a single moment of absolute rage. What hit the hegemony fleet wasn't artillery in any sense they understood. The converted mining ship Gaia's Hammer opened its cargo bays and disgorged a cloud of what appeared to be metallic dust. Millions of microscopic fabricators, each no larger than a grain of sand, spread across the void in expanding spheres. They had been designed to process asteroid ore in deep space, but their programming had been altered for a singular new purpose: reproduction. Within seconds, they began consuming the debris from New Geneva, converting the shattered remains of humanity's greatest achievement into copies of themselves. The cloud grew exponentially, each new fabricator adding to the swarms, collective mass and intelligence. "What is that?" HFY demanded, watching the tactical display with growing alarm as the cloud approached his screening elements. His question was answered when the nanoscale swarm encountered the destroyer harsh truth. The ship's shields flared. As trillions of microscopic machines made contact, each one programmed with the atomic signature of hegemony hull alloys. Within minutes, the destroyer's armor began to dissolve, its constituent metals being harvested and converted into more fabricators. The crew's panicked transmissions cut off abruptly as the ship's life support systems were consumed from the inside. "Out! All ships! Emergency withdrawal to—" HFY's order was interrupted by his weapons officer. "Sir, reading massive power buildup from the human mining vessels." The ships that had once carved mountains apart on airless worlds now turned, their industrial lasers toward the hegemony fleet. But these weren't the focused beams used for precision work. Instead, the humans had linked their mining arrays in parallel, creating cutting tools capable of slicing through planetary crusts, now aimed at military targets. The first beam struck the heavy cruiser Dominant Force amidships. The laser, designed to cut through kilometers of solid rock, went through the ship's armor like it was paper. The cruiser split cleanly in half, its two sections spinning away in opposite directions. "Return fire, all weapons!" HFY screamed. The hegemony response was textbook military doctrine: concentrated plasma barrages targeting the largest human vessels. The Sovereign Talon's main batteries spoke with the voice of stellar fire, each shot carrying enough energy to glass a continent. The plasma struck the human cargo hauler. Endless horizon and was absorbed. The ship's hull, originally designed to transport refined metals in bulk, had been lined with adaptive armor plating that could absorb and redistribute energy. The heat that should have vaporized the vessel instead powered its weapons systems. The Endless Horizon responded with a railgun salvo that used the ship's entire cargo capacity as ammunition. Millions of tons of processed steel, launched at relativistic velocities, turned the hegemony light cruiser Silent Blade into an expanding cloud of superheated gas. But the true horror of humanity's response wasn't in their improvised weapons or industrial conversion of civilian assets. It was in their coordination. Every human ship moved with the precision of a single organism, their actions guided by quantum-entangled communication networks that allowed for instantaneous command and control across the entire solar system. Commander Ishara Voss, aboard the converted research vessel Deep Thought, watched the battle unfold from her position near Saturn's rings. Her ship had been studying the gas giant's magnetic field when the attack began. Now, those same magnetic field generators that had been used for scientific research became weapons of terrifying scope. "Charging the magnetosphere disruptor," she reported over the tactical network. "Targeting the enemy flagship." The Deep Thought fired not at the Sovereign Talon, but at space itself, creating a localized magnetic field so intense it warped the fabric of reality around the hegemony dreadnought. The ship's navigation system screamed warnings as artificial gravity fields tore at its hull, and its crew found themselves pressed against bulkheads by forces that should not have existed. "Impossible," HFY gasped, his carapace creaking, under the gravitational stress. "These are not weapons of war. These are construction tools." Fleet Commander Skavik's voice cut through the chaos with mechanical precision. "Admiral, humanity has been building in space for 3 centuries. We move mountains, harvest stars, and reshape worlds. Did you really think we couldn't unmake a..." Few ships? The nanoscale fabricators had finished consuming the harsh truth and were now spreading toward the next target, their numbers having grown to encompass several cubic kilometers of space. Behind them, the converted mining ships continued their methodical dismantling of the hegemony fleet, their cutting beams working with the patience of machines that had spent decades carving through asteroid belts. This wasn't a battle. It was demolition work. The converted agricultural ship Harvest Moon drifted through the debris field where a hegemony squadron had been moments before. Its massive hydroponic bays, once used to feed colony worlds, now served a different purpose entirely. The same atmospheric processors that had terraformed dead worlds were creating pockets of highly reactive gas in the vacuum of space. Captain Naya Delacroix watched her tactical display with the calm focus of someone who had spent decades managing crop yields across stellar distances. The enemy destroyer approaching her position showed the arrogance typical of hegemony doctrine, a direct assault against what they perceived as a defenseless supply ship. "Release the atmospheric package," she ordered. The Harvest Moon's cargo bays opened, disgorging clouds of super-oxygenated atmosphere mixed with trace elements designed for accelerated plant growth. In the vacuum of space, the mixture formed an invisible sphere of highly combustible gas around the approaching destroyer. The hegemony ship fired its plasma weapons, expecting to vaporize another converted civilian vessel. Instead, the plasma ignited the atmospheric cloud in a chain reaction that consumed the destroyer in a sphere of fire visible from Mars. Across the battlefield, humanity's response continued to unfold with the methodical precision of species that had learned to think in geological timescales. The deep space construction ship World Shaper used its planetary engineering equipment to create localized gravity wells, trapping entire hegemony squadrons in artificial tide pools of warped spacetime. "This is impossible," Admiral Kethmore transmitted, from the heavy battleship Inexorable Conquest. His vessel, one of the hegemony's most advanced warships, found itself unable to maneuver as gravitational fields compressed and expanded around it in patterns that defied physics. "Our intelligence said they had no military-industrial capacity." Fleet Commander Skavik's response came from the bridge of what had once been a luxury passenger liner. The Stellar Dreams had carried tourists to observe supernovas from safe distances. Now its observation equipment tracked every hegemony vessel with perfect precision, while its passenger quarters had been converted into ammunition manufactories. "Admiral, you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about humanity," Skavik said, his voice carrying the weight of industrial certainty. "We don't have military-industrial capacity. We have industrial capacity. The distinction matters." The truth of his words was being demonstrated across the Sol system. On Ceres, automated mining facilities that had operated for centuries without human oversight were retooling themselves, their production lines shifting from extracted metals to weapons of war. The asteroid belt itself was becoming a factory, turning raw material into instruments of destruction at a rate that made hegemony military production look like artisan craftswork. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, aboard the research vessel Infinite Curiosity, monitored the conversion process from her position near Jupiter's L4 point. Her ship had been studying exotic matter when the attack began. Now those same exotic matter generators were creating ammunition that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "Deploying temporal distortion munitions," she reported with the same tone she might have used to announce a successful experiment. The weapons she launched didn't explode in any conventional sense. Instead, they created bubbles of accelerated time around their targets, aging hegemony ships centuries in seconds. The heavy cruiser Eternal Dominance crumbled to dust as its hull aged past structural integrity, its crew reduced to archaeological curiosities in the span of heartbeats. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of humanity's response was its scalability. Every destroyed hegemony ship provided more raw material for the nanoscale fabricators, which converted enemy vessels into tools for destroying more enemy vessels. The manufacturing base of human civilization was growing exponentially, fed by the corpses of its attackers. Commander Zara Okafor watched this process from the bridge of the Economic Miracle, a cargo ship that had spent decades transporting goods between the outer colonies. Her vessel's cargo handling equipment now managed logistics on a scale that made ancient military supply chains look primitive. Engineering efficiency at 97%, she reported. Raw material conversion holding steady, at current. Consumption rates will have processed their entire fleet into useful components within 6 hours. The hegemony had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human civilization. They had looked for military assets, warships, weapons, factories, trained soldiers. What they had found instead was a species that treated the reshaping of solar systems as routine maintenance, that moved asteroids like garden tools, and that had spent 3 centuries learning to build anything they could imagine. Now they were imagining the complete annihilation of everything that had threatened their home. The moment Captain BlackHFY realized the true scope of humanity's response was when his flagship's computational systems began reporting impossible numbers. "Sir," his intelligence officer chittered, compound eyes reflecting the horror of the tactical display, "their manufacturing capacity is expanding exponentially. Current projections show them capable of producing more tonnage of war material in the next hour than our entire fleet represents." BlackHFY studied the readouts with growing dread. The humans weren't just fighting, they were industrializing warfare itself. Every destroyed hegemony vessel became raw material for weapons that destroyed more ships, which became material for more weapons, in an ever-accelerating cycle of conversion and destruction. The Sovereign Talon shuddered as another wave of temporal distortion munitions detonated nearby, aging sections of the ship's outer hull to the point of structural failure. Around them, the proud hegemony fleet was being systematically dismantled by mining equipment, research tools, and cargo haulers. "Request immediate reinforcements from the Second Fleet," BlackHFY ordered. "Full escalation protocols." "Sir," his communications officer replied with barely controlled panic. "The Second Fleet reports they are occupied." On the bridge's main display, feeds from across hegemony space painted a terrifying picture. Humanity's response hadn't been limited to the Sol system. Somehow, impossibly, human ships were appearing throughout hegemony territory. Not invasion fleets, construction crews. The orbital shipyards above Kethvar Prime were being systematically disassembled by ships that looked like mobile mining platforms. The fortress world of Zarthak found its defense satellites converted into scrap metal by vessels that resembled deep space construction equipment. Across 12 sectors, the infrastructure of hegemony power was being taken apart with the methodical precision of a demolition project. Commander Elena Vasquez, aboard the Perpetual Motion, coordinated the assault on the hegemony's primary fleet base from her position in the Vega system. Her ship had originally been designed for long-range stellar engineering, moving dead stars to create navigational markers. Now those same stellar manipulation tools were being used to destabilize the binary star system that powered the hegemony's most important military facility. "Initiating controlled stellar fluctuation," she reported. "Estimated time to photosphere destabilization, 14 minutes. The hegemony base, built to withstand conventional military assault, had no defenses against someone who could make its sun hiccup. As the star's output fluctuated wildly, the base's fusion reactors began overloading, their safety systems overwhelmed by energy patterns that changed faster than their compensation algorithms could adapt. Back in Sol's system, Dr. Ames Pritchard was conducting what he called aggressive materials science from the bridge of the research vessel Paradigm Shift. His ship had been designed to study exotic matter at the edge of known physics. Now it was creating exotic matter specifically designed to make hegemony technology stop working. Deploying quantum coherence disruptors, he announced with the enthusiasm of a researcher who had just discovered something fascinating. The weapons he launched didn't destroy their targets in any conventional sense. Instead, they altered the fundamental constants of physics in localized areas, making it impossible for hegemony technology to function. The battleship Absolute Authority found its fusion reactors simply stopping, not failing, not overloading, but ceasing to function as the basic nuclear forces that held atoms together. Became slightly different in the space around the ship. The vessel drifted powerless, its crew trapped in a bubble of reality where their technology had become impossible. "This is not warfare," Admiral Kethmore transmitted from his crippled flagship. "This is systematic annihilation." Fleet Commander Skavik's response came from coordinates that kept shifting as his command ship moved through space with impossible speed. The Stellar Dreams was using drive systems based on Alcubierre field manipulation, technology developed for faster-than-light passenger service, now repurposed for tactical advantage. "Admiral, you came to our system to demonstrate our place in your galactic order. You wanted to show us that resistance was futile, that we should bow to superior force." Skavik's voice carried no anger, no hatred, only the cold calculation of an engineer solving a particularly complex problem. "We're showing you what superior force actually looks like." The demonstration was comprehensive. Hegemony reinforcements arriving via hyperspace found their exit points blocked by gravitational anomalies created by ships that had once studied black holes. Supply convoys discovered their routes interdicted by vessels that had spent decades learning to navigate the chaotic gravitational fields of triple-star systems. Communication networks went dark as research ships used their deep space communication arrays to jam hegemony frequencies while simultaneously broadcasting surrender demands on every available channel. Within 4 hours of the initial attack on New Geneva, the hegemony found itself fighting not a war, but a phenomenon. Humanity had turned the entire infrastructure of interstellar civilization into a weapon, and they were wielding it with the terrifying competence of a species that had learned to treat the impossible as routine maintenance. High Counselor Kethral of the Galactic Hegemony received the emergency transmission while reviewing poetry in his private chambers. The concept of humanity as anything more than a minor irritant had seemed absurd just hours ago. Now, as reports flooded in from across hegemony space, he began to understand that they were facing something unprecedented in their 12,000 years of dominance. "Honorable Counselor," the panicked voice of Admiral Zexcrawl crackled through subspace static. "We need immediate authorization for the deployment of stellar-class weapons. The human response exceeds all tactical parameters." Kethral studied the tactical summaries with growing disbelief. In 6 hours, humanity had not only repelled the largest military force the hegemony had deployed in 3 centuries, they had simultaneously launched coordinated assaults on 17 major military installations across 8 sectors. The logistics alone should have been impossible. "How many ships do they have?" he demanded. "That's difficult to determine, sir. They appear to be converting their entire civilian infrastructure into military assets in real time. Current estimates suggest they can manufacture and deploy new vessels faster than we can destroy them." The implications hit Kethral like a physical blow. The hegemony's power had always rested on their ability to project overwhelming force against species that maintained clear distinctions between military and civilian capabilities. Humanity had no such distinction. Their cargo haulers were weapons platforms. Their research vessels were generators of impossible physics. Their mining ships were tools of systematic destruction. On Luna, Chief Engineer Marcus Kowalski was putting the finishing touches on humanity's most ambitious response to the hegemony's aggression. His team had spent the last 4 hours converting the moon's mass driver, originally built to launch supplies to Mars colonies, into something that violated several interstellar treaties that Earth had never signed. Mass driver reconfiguration complete, he reported to Fleet Command. We've linked every lunar mining facility into a single launch system. Current capacity, approximately 60 million tons of processed lunar material per minute. The moon itself was about to become a weapon. The conversion had been stunningly simple in concept. Lunar mining operations had been extracting and processing materials for centuries, creating vast underground facilities that could harvest, refine, and launch materials with industrial efficiency. Now, instead of sending refined metals to Mars, they were preparing to send Luna's entire available mass toward specific coordinates in space. "Target acquired," reported Gunnery Coordinator Lisa Brennan, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who managed construction projects across solar systems. Hegemony Fleet Concentration Bearing 27 Mark 8. Range, 4.7 million kilometers. Time to impact at current acceleration, 16 minutes. What lifted from Luna's surface wasn't a projectile in any conventional sense. It was a stream of processed lunar material, silicon, iron, titanium, rare earth elements, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by electromagnetic launchers that had been designed to make interplanetary commerce economical. The mass driver had been built to move cargo. Now it was moving approximately 1/10 of the moon's available mass toward the Hegemony fleet. Captain HFY watched the projectile stream approach on his tactical display with the fascination of someone witnessing their own execution. The Sovereign Talon's computational systems had calculated the kinetic energy of the incoming barrage and determined that conventional evasion was impossible. The projectiles weren't following ballistic trajectories. They were course-correcting. During flight, their paths adjusted by the same guidance systems that had once ensured supply shipments reach their destinations. "All ships, emergency hyperspace jump," he ordered. Immediate withdrawal to... The first wave of lunar material struck the Hegemony formation at roughly 20% the speed of light. The kinetic energy release was equivalent to several stellar detonations compressed into individual impacts. Ships that had weathered the assault of entire planetary defense networks simply ceased to exist, converted to expanding spheres of plasma and exotic matter. The Sovereign Talon, positioned at the center of the formation, took a direct hit from approximately 50,000 tons of processed titanium. The impact didn't destroy the ship. It translated it into a different state of matter entirely, one that existed only in the theoretical physics textbooks of species advanced enough to study the fundamental nature of reality. But the true message of humanity's response wasn't the destruction of the Hegemony fleet. It was what had made that destruction possible. They had converted an entire moon into a weapon system in less than 6 hours, using nothing more than existing industrial infrastructure and the kind of engineering expertise that any spacefaring civilization developed as a matter of survival. The bombardment continued for 17 minutes, each wave of projectiles representing years of lunar mining output compressed into moments of absolute devastation. When it finally ended, the space where the Hegemony fleet had assembled contained nothing but cooling plasma and the expanding shock waves of matter that had been accelerated beyond the bounds of conventional physics. On Earth, Fleet Commander Skavik reviewed the tactical reports with the satisfaction of an engineer whose calculations had proven correct. The response had been precisely calibrated, devastating enough to eliminate the immediate threat, comprehensive enough to demonstrate humanity's true capabilities, and efficient enough to be repeated whenever necessary. "Send a message to the Hegemony High Council," he ordered. "Standard diplomatic channels." The message that reached the Hegemony High Council was not what they expected from a species that had just witnessed the destruction of their orbital city. There were no demands for compensation, no threats of retaliation, no emotional appeals for justice. Instead, it was a technical report. "Honored Council," Fleet Commander Skavik's transmission began, his image appearing in the council chambers with the neutral professionalism of a project manager delivering quarterly results. "We have completed our analysis of your recent industrial accident in the Sol system. Our findings indicate significant inefficiencies in your military production methodologies. High Counselor Kethrall stared at the human with barely contained rage. Industrial accident? You destroyed the largest fleet ever assembled by the hegemony. Yes, Skavik agreed with the tone of someone confirming a minor scheduling adjustment. The conversion efficiency was approximately 94%. We estimate the total useful material harvested from your vessels will supply our manufacturing base for approximately 6 days, after which we will need to locate additional sources of raw materials. The implications of that statement settled over the council chamber like a toxic cloud. Humanity wasn't threatening the hegemony, they were evaluating them as a resource. Furthermore, Skavik continued, our logistics analysis indicates that your current territorial expansion model is unsustainable. You've been conquering systems without developing the industrial infrastructure to maintain meaningful defensive capabilities. We calculate that your entire military force could be processed into useful components within approximately 47 days of continuous operations. Counselor Mekthar, military liaison for the 3rd Sector, found his voice first. You cannot possibly have the manufacturing capacity to threaten the entire hegemony. Our intelligence reports show Your intelligence reports are based on the assumption that we maintain separate military and civilian industrial bases, Skavik interrupted. This assumption is incorrect. Humanity's industrial capacity is our military capacity. Every asteroid mining operation is a potential weapons platform. Every cargo transport is a kinetic bombardment system. Every research station is a development facility for exotic weapons technology. To demonstrate his point, Skavik gestured to something outside the transmission's range. For example, we are currently using the Sol system's asteroid belt to construct additional manufacturing facilities. Current production rate is approximately 400 new vessels per day, with each vessel capable of independent resource extraction and reproduction. At this expansion rate, we will exceed your total fleet capacity within 1 standard month. The council chamber erupted in panicked chittering as the mathematics of exponential growth became clear. Humanity wasn't just defending themselves, they were becoming something that could consume the hegemony's entire military infrastructure and convert it into tools for further expansion. This is impossible, Kethrall shrieked. No species can industrialize warfare to that degree. With respect, Counselor, you appear to have misunderstood the nature of human civilization. Skavik's response carried no mockery, only the patient explanation of a teacher addressing a confused student. We are not a military species that has learned to build. We are a building species that has learned to fight. The distinction is significant. Across the galaxy, the truth of that statement was being demonstrated in real time. Human ships were appearing at the edge of hegemony systems, but they weren't invasion fleets. They were construction crews, beginning the methodical process of dismantling military infrastructure and converting it into tools for further expansion. The fortress world of Keldaran watched its orbital defense platforms being systematically deconstructed by ships that looked like mobile shipyards. The platforms weren't being destroyed, they were being improved, their weapon systems upgraded, and their power sources replaced with more efficient designs. Within hours, the defenses that had protected the world for millennia were pointing inward, now under human control. We're not conquerors, Captain Delacroix reported from the Harvest Moon as her ship finished converting a hegemony supply depot into an agricultural processing center. We're renovators. Their infrastructure is poorly designed for actual productivity. The hegemony had built their empire on intimidation and overwhelming force, but their underlying industrial base was designed for maintaining status quo, not for innovation or expansion. Human engineers, looking at hegemony technology with the eyes of species that routinely built megastructures, saw nothing but inefficiency and wasted potential. In summary, Skavik concluded his transmission to the High Council, we are prepared to offer the hegemony 3 options. First, immediate withdrawal from all conquered territories and transition to a cooperative trade relationship based on mutual benefit. Second, gradual integration into human civilization as a client species with protected status. Third, systematic conversion of hegemony assets into useful materials for human expansion projects. The silence in the council chamber stretched for long moments as the full scope of humanity's offer became clear. They weren't demanding surrender. They were offering business proposals. What, Kethral managed to ask, happens if we choose to continue military resistance? Skavik's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The look of an engineer calculating load tolerances. Then we demonstrate the scalability of our industrial response. Currently, we've committed approximately 3% of our total manufacturing capacity to this project. Escalation would be comprehensive. 6 months after the Luna bombardment, as historians would later call humanity's conversion of an entire moon into a kinetic weapon, High Counselor Kethral stood in what had once been the primary war room of the Hegemony High Command. Now it served as the headquarters for the Galactic Reconstruction Project, and the beings working at the control stations were an unsettling mixture of hegemony officials and human engineers. The transformation had been more terrifying than any military conquest could have been, precisely because it hadn't been conquest at all. It had been optimization. Status report, he requested from the human coordinator, a woman named Director Yolanda Reed, who had previously managed terraforming operations across 17 systems. She now managed the systematic restructuring of galactic civilization with the same casual competence. Efficiency gains are ahead of schedule, Reed reported, consulting a holographic display that showed resource flows across hundreds of systems. Former hegemony military infrastructure has been converted to manufacturing and research facilities. Current productivity is up 400% from pre-integration levels, with waste down to less than 2%. The numbers told a story that Kethral was still struggling to comprehend. Within weeks of humanity's ultimatum, it had become clear that resistance was not just futile, it was economically irrational. Human engineering teams had begun arriving at hegemony worlds not as conquerors, but as consultants, offering to demonstrate more efficient methods of resource extraction, manufacturing, and transportation. The results had been undeniable. Planets that had struggled to meet their tribute quotas under hegemony rule were now producing surplus materials while simultaneously improving living conditions for their populations. Species that had been oppressed for millennia found themselves partners in construction projects that spanned solar systems. The Vorthak delegation has requested assistance with their stellar engineering project, Reed continued. They want to build a Dyson swarm around their primary star. Human construction teams can have the basic framework operational within 8 months. Kethral nodded absently. The Vorthak had been rebellious subjects for centuries. Their resistance movements crushed dozens of times by hegemony forces. Now, they were voluntary partners in humanity's expansion of galactic infrastructure. Their warrior culture redirected toward the conquest of physics rather than each other. What about the military situation? He asked, though the question felt increasingly obsolete. Reed smiled with the patient amusement of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. Counselor, there is no military situation. There's only the construction schedule. She gestured to the galactic display where thousands of points of light showed ongoing human projects. The Zelthak resistance in Sector 7 requested weapons to fight their oppressors. We sent them mining equipment and showed them how to build orbital habitats. Turns out, when you can relocate your entire population to space-based facilities, ground-side oppression becomes irrelevant. The transformation hadn't been achieved through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that humanity's approach to civilization was more effective than anything the hegemony had developed in 12 millennia of dominance. Species after species had looked at the choice between continued subjugation under an inefficient system and partnership in an expanding network of prosperity and made the obvious selection. The former hegemony battle fleet has been integrated into the Deep Space Construction Corps, Reed continued. Admiral BlackHFY, Project Coordinator BlackHFY, reports that his crews have adapted well to their new role in asteroid belt development. He says it's more challenging than military combat ever was. Kethral had spoken with BlackHFY just weeks earlier. The former admiral had been almost unrecognizable, his bearing transformed from military arrogance to the confident competence of someone who had found meaningful work. He commanded a fleet of vessels that had once been instruments of oppression, now converted into tools for building ring worlds and space habitats. I still don't understand, Kethral admitted. How do you maintain control over such a vast network? How do you prevent rebellion? We don't prevent rebellion, Reed replied. We make it unnecessary. When every member species has access to unlimited resources and the technological capacity to build whatever they can imagine, what would they rebel against? Scarcity breeds conflict. Abundance breeds cooperation. The mathematical elegance of humanity's approach had become undeniable. Rather than maintaining control through force, they had created a system where cooperation was more profitable than resistance. Species that had fought against hegemony rule for centuries found themselves competing to contribute more to humanity's galactic construction projects. A chime indicated an incoming transmission. Fleet Commander Skavik's image appeared in the center of the room, his background showing the vast construction yards that now surrounded Earth's moon. Luna had been rebuilt, its mass restored through asteroid mining operations, but its surface now bristled with manufacturing facilities that produced everything from starships to artificial habitats. Director Reed, Counselor Kethral, Skavik, acknowledged them with a nod. I'm transmitting the final assessment of the Hegemony Integration Project. The report that appeared was both comprehensive and devastating in its implications. In 18 months, humanity had not just defeated the galactic hegemony, they had made it obsolete. The infrastructure of oppression had been converted into tools of creation, the machinery of war transformed into engines of prosperity. Total resource efficiency has increased by 600%, Skavik reported. Interstellar transport costs have dropped by 90%. Quality of life indices for all integrated species show consistent improvement. Most significantly, we've eliminated the economic incentives that originally drove hegemony expansion. The EL's final statistic made Kethral's breathing apparatus flutter. Current galactic manufacturing capacity exceeds the total resource requirements of all known species by a factor of 47. We have effectively solved the problem of scarcity on a galactic scale. It was the end of an era that had lasted 12,000 years. The age of conquest was over, not because war had been abolished, but because it had become economically pointless. Why fight over resources when you could simply build more resources? Why oppress other species when their voluntary cooperation was more productive than their forced compliance? There is one final matter, Skavik added, his tone carrying a note of something that might have been satisfaction. The Andromeda Survey Project has identified several potential construction sites for intergalactic infrastructure. We estimate that bridging to the nearest galaxy will require approximately 40% of our current industrial capacity. Kethral realized, with a mixture of awe and terror, that humanity wasn't satisfied with optimizing a single galaxy. They were already planning to extend their industrial revolution to neighboring galactic clusters, spreading their philosophy of abundance across cosmic distances that made the Hegemony's empire look like a single star system. The age of scarcity is ending, Reed said, her words carrying the weight of historical inevitability. What comes next is limited only by our imagination. Outside the station's viewports, construction ships moved with purposeful precision, their work lights creating new constellations against the darkness of space. They were building something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based not on the control of limited resources, but on the unlimited expansion of possibility itself. The hegemony had fired first, seeking to demonstrate humanity's place in their established order. Instead, they had triggered the birth of an entirely new order, one where the old equations of power and dominance had been replaced by the simple mathematics of engineering. Given sufficient resources and energy, anything that could be imagined could be built. And humanity, it turned out, had a very vivid imagination. The moon that had once been carved into a weapon now served as the cornerstone of a galactic infrastructure project that would have been incomprehensible to the beings who had thought they could intimidate its creators. It stood as eternal testimony to a simple truth. Those who build are always more powerful than those who merely conquer. The stars themselves had become humanity's construction materials, and they were just getting started.